Hello happy writers, I'm Steve Sommin and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about writing effective action, and I know a lot of people are looking forward to this kind of information. But before we get into that, please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell, and then you'll get notifications every time I drop a video. Like you, I've seen all the advice on the internet about how to write action, and I just want to put my 2 penneth worth in. I want to give you some of the tools that I use for writing action to make it more effective. The first mistake people make about writing action is to assume that it's the only thing that they need to understand is how to write a fight scene or a combat scene. But action is so much more than that. With that in mind, we're going to focus on how to write action in general rather than how to write a fight scene. That's because if you can write action effectively, no matter what kind of action this is, then fight scenes should sort of work themselves out. Okay, the first thing we need to understand is action is tied to the principles of pace. The faster the action, the faster the pace. So when we know that it's tied to the principles of pace, we also understand that it involves how people perceive time as passing in order to get that faster pace. And with action, some things go really fast and some things go so slowly, it's mind-boggling. It's like time slows down. Not everything in a fight scene or in flight is tied to being fast. There's always a piece of that action that seems to defy the laws of physics. Another thing to remember is not to try and keep the same fast pace going through all the action, because we do have this changing perception of time. And if you remember from the video we did on pace, you'd still realise that the more things that happen within a paragraph, the faster the pace of the action. Now that we've covered that, we need to look at one of the most common types of advice that we get, and that is to use strong verbs. This is fantastic advice because I would suggest using strong verbs all the time, and there is one thing that you need to remember. If you're using a strong verb, that it's going to have a more specific meaning. Take pelted and bolted, for example. He pelted down the street. This says more about him running towards something or after something, even though it still means run very fast. However, bolted gives us a feeling that they are running away from something rather than running to something. So when you choose your verb, you need to choose it carefully, and you really need to understand what are the implications of that particular verb. So when it comes to action, how do you actually start getting into the action itself? Now, if that action is kind of expected and you're working with the reader's expectations of what's going to happen, it's better to have a build-up of pace into the action, rather than just surprising them with a sudden flurry of fast-paced writing. The next we need to look at an explosion. When do we use an explosion for writing with action? Well, usually this is when something surprising or shocking happens. And so you're trundling along quite nicely and then bang, everything happens at once. This is most effective for surprises and shocks and the unexpected. And to a certain extent, you can even do this with action that you have already foreshadowed and the reader knows is coming, but they're just waiting for it. Another way to actually get this is to have the shocking incident start off with a real bang and then slow it right down so that the character can fully appreciate the shock of everything that's going on, because maybe they're perceiving time as slowing down in just that one moment, and then everything speeds up again. So you get this explosion, then sudden drop off, and then pace. If the action is going to be quite fast for a considerable period of writing, so maybe it's over an entire chapter, you want to have a really fast-paced chapter, you really need to consider ebb and flow with the pacing. You don't want to have that constant fast pace all the way through your writing. So vary it up a little so as it'll keep the reader interested. For example, if you've got a very large fight scene, you don't want to have the fight just continuously going fast. You want to have moments where they go at each other and then they break apart while they re-establish what they're doing and their dominance and all that kind of stuff. This is where you get this ebb and flow going on. And remember, when it comes to fast-paced action scenes, you want to keep it simple. Less is more. So, basically, instead of describing every punch, every blow, every step, the long run down the road or the car crash, you want to just keep it to the essentials. The crash, the sudden shock, the move forward, the blow to the head. You want to minimise it so as you're only talking about the essential elements, and you want to keep that language simple so that anyone can understand. So you don't necessarily need to talk about the sensation of being hit or the sensation of actually connecting with someone's face or that feeling of the car crashing into the central reservation. What you want is to get the essential elements out because they need to be fast. If you do it right, we can kind of get a feeling of what it's going to feel like by the verbs you're using and the way that you're writing this action. Fight and flight. Now, these are two types of action that have very similar feelings. There's lots of fast-paced action going on. It's just that in a fight, it's usually very physical, lots of connecting blows and stuff like that. So you edit it down and you only talk about the essential elements. With flight, it may be that there's still a lot of things going on, but it's more about the internal feelings, the sensation of worrying about the person chasing after them or the thing chasing after them, depending on what you're writing. But also the feeling, the breath, the heart racing, the pounding of the feet. All these things build into the action and the pace of the action. With any good action scene, there is always this moment of waiting. Whether it's before the action, in the middle of the action, or after the action, there is always this moment where you're just waiting for the next thing to happen. This is when you have a really slow pace. You draw it out and it can feel like an eternity to the person who's involved in the action. It doesn't mean that nothing is happening. It's just that time is stretching out slowly. For example, they may be in the middle of the fight and their opponent throws a punch and they see it coming. That punch was telegraphed from 3 miles away and they see it coming and the fist is so big it seems to have its own gravity. And as it's coming closer and closer, they prepare themselves for the jolt and boom! And you're back into the fast-paced action. But that was the long wait. That was slowing the perception of time. The actual punch itself was much faster than that. These are just some of the things that you need to write action. So you need to think about your pacing, you need to vary it, you need to keep the specific strong verbs, and you need to keep the language simple. And remember, for the faster pace, less is more. However, there are a few things that will really enhance your action scenes if you use them effectively. Now, I wouldn't suggest you use these in every action scene, but they can help certain ones. So, for example, rhythm. Rhythm is something that can be used very effectively in any kind of action scene. Unless the action scene is chaotic. If the action scene is supposed to be chaotic, then rhythm is not really your friend here. However, if you've got two skilled fighters, there is going to be a rhythm to the action that's taking place. If you've got a skilled fighter with an unskilled fighter, you're going to have this kind of chaotic pace coming from one side with more of a rhythmic fast pace coming from a more skilled fighter. And the same goes for things like running. Just think about running. It's like pound, pound, pound on the pavement of the rhythm of your running. If you can get this rhythm to come across, then it can have a really strong impact on the reader, even if they're not aware that the rhythm is actually there. And to the casual reader, it probably isn't. To a more advanced reader, then they probably notice it. But it does have an impact on the overall scene. And if you want to make sure that you're getting a regular rhythm with the words that you're using, say the words and tap out the rhythm as you're saying it. The next one is Onomatopeaia. I love Onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is, for me, one of the chances that you get to be the most creative. You get to create a word for your own sounds. We all understand what those sounds are, what they're supposed to represent. So if you've got a sound happening, you can use onomatopoeia to start your action, to finish your action, and you can actually create your own word for this sound. I find that if you create your own onomatopoeia, then it actually makes the world more real for the reader and for you as a writer as well. Maybe it's the drama student in me, but something I really do love is assonance, alliteration, and sibilance. You've probably learnt about these things at school and you know that they're useful, and quite often you probably use them in poetry and stuff like that, but it's doubtful that anyone's ever taught to you about how it's used in prose. And when you're writing an action sequence, these techniques can actually have a huge impact on what the reader feels. I wouldn't overdo it, but if it's done right and the reader's reading the passage and they barely notice it, then it means that they've actually connected with the action and the narrative and the character on an unconscious level. If it is something that stands out to the reader, then the chances are that it pushes them out the story because they're thinking, oh, assonance. It wasn't a natural part of the writing or what the character's experiencing. It does take a little bit of practice to get this right. Emotional response. Now, when the action is really fast-paced, so even in a fight, you can't ignore the emotional response, but you need to use strong emotional words. Again, this comes to the idea of using strong verbs with very specific meanings. You don't want to tell the reader that it made him feel sick. You want to use something like, his stomach lurched. This is a strong verb and would actually get across this idea of how he feels and what kind of emotion he must be going through. So if he said his stomach lurched at the sight of the blood, fully aware that he's not used to this level of violence and this level of gore. It's disturbing to the character. Put it into context of the action that's going on. The blood sprayed down his face and his stomach lurched, but he still threw another punch. It's still within the confines of the action, but we understand that he's sickened by the violence that he's committing. So it gives us a tie-in to how he's feeling, what he's thinking, but doesn't detract from the pace of the action. When you're writing and you want to make sure that you're getting a really fast pace and effective action, read the paragraphs. How long are the paragraphs? Are they really long? How long are the sentences? Are they short? Are you using strong verbs? Are you giving information that we don't really need? And if you take it out, does it make that action a little bit faster without confusing the reader? The only thing that should be in there with fast-paced action is enough information for the reader to understand what's happening. Now, obviously, these are just my ideas on how to write action, and you can take them or leave them, and if this really helps you, fantastic. If it doesn't, then I'm really glad that you already know how to write action effectively. Now, if you like this content and you want to see more, please like, share and subscribe. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, press a bell, and then you'll get notifications every time I drop a video. Until next time, bye.